The briefing document was 43 pages long, which Soren Vale considered excessive until he reached page 12 and revised his assessment to insufficient. Page 12 was where the incident reports began, 5 of them, each one clinical in language and escalating in implication, each one describing what happened to a human nervous system in the unshielded presence of an Ethari psychic projector. The 5th report, the most recent, used the phrase complete suspension of voluntary cognitive function, which the attending physician had apparently felt was more accurate than the alternatives, and which Soren felt was the kind of phrase that justified 43 pages and possibly more. He signed the briefing. He attended the mandatory safety orientation. He collected his shielding badge, a small device worn at the collar that generated a low-frequency dampening field rated for standard Ethari psychic output. And he arrived at the opening reception with the modest ambition of a man who intends to spend the evening being professionally invisible. Meyer 3 was not a beautiful station, but it was a neutral one, which in diplomatic terms was more valuable. It occupied a precise midpoint in the transit corridor between Accord space and Ethari territory, maintained by a joint operational agreement that had been renewed every 7 years since the initial contact, and that everyone involved regarded as a fragile thing, to be handled with the care you give to objects that have survived longer than they were built for. The reception hall was large enough to contain the delegations without crowding and configured in the way of rooms designed for people who might need to leave quickly. Clear sightlines, multiple exits, nothing that could be easily overturned. Soren found a corner near a secondary systems terminal, his natural habitat at any official function, a position from which he could monitor the translation feed, confirm the infrastructure was operating correctly, and avoid being the person someone senior turned to when they needed a response to something they should have prepared for. He had a drink he was not particularly interested in consuming and a monitoring tablet he was very interested in consulting. And he was doing both with the focused inattention of a man who has mastered the art of looking occupied without appearing to hide. The Ethari delegation moved through the room with the unhurried quality of people who have never, in the history of their civilization, needed to hurry. They were tall and still, and their eyes had a quality that the briefing document described as luminous in the technical sense, a biological feature of their visual system, and that the human staff kept accidentally staring at before remembering that the briefing had mentioned eye contact as a category of inadvisable behavior. The shielding zones around the senior members were clearly marked on every surface, rendered in a soft amber light that functioned as both boundary and reminder. Queen Vassara was in the center of the room. Soren knew this because everyone in the room knew this. She was the point around which the space organized itself, her exclusion zone the largest, her shielding detail the most extensive, her presence generating the particular quality of careful distance that people maintain around something genuinely powerful. He looked at her once from his corner, the way you look at something that the briefing document has described extensively, and that reality has rendered, as reality usually does, as both exactly what you expected and somehow more than that. Then he looked back at his tablet. The translation feed was running cleanly. The atmospheric regulation was nominal. The secondary systems terminal was doing what secondary systems terminals do, which is nothing dramatic and nothing requiring attention. He was making a note about a minor latency in the east wing relay when the chair beside him was occupied. He registered it peripherally first, a presence, a displacement of the ambient sound of the room, the slight change in the air that a body creates when it enters a space. He glanced sideways with the automatic reflex of someone checking who had joined him in his corner, expecting a junior staff member or a delegation aide looking for a quiet moment. Vassara, queen of the Ethari, looked back at him from a distance of approximately 40 centimeters with the expression of someone who has done something deliberate and is observing its results with focused attention. Soren's monitoring tablet registered nothing unusual. His shielding badge emitted no alert. His nervous system reported, in its honest and comprehensive way, a warmth, ambient, even not unpleasant, like stepping into a room where the temperature is precisely right. That was all. That was, given everything in the briefing document, entirely impossible. He sat very still for a moment the way people sit still when they are deciding whether what is happening is actually happening. Vassara watched him. Her eyes, luminous in the technical sense, held a quality he could not name and did not try to. She did not speak. The psychic projection that should have been catastrophic for his neurology moved through him like a frequency that had found its resonant structure and had no interest in destruction. He became aware that his drink was in his hand, and that he had not consumed any of it, and that this seemed like a reasonable state of affairs to maintain indefinitely. He became aware of the room around them, of the organized distance everyone was maintaining from the Queen's exclusion zone, of the fact that her shielding detail was on the opposite side of a significant crowd, of the secondary corner's natural tendency to escape the attention of people who were busy being significant elsewhere. He said very quietly, because it was the only thing available to him that was both honest and not alarming, "Hello." Her head tilted slightly. Something in the warmth shifted, not words, not language, but the shape of attention, the quality of a response. 6 minutes later, her security coordinator found them. The neurological examination took 4 hours and produced readings that the attending physician studied with the particular expression of someone who has been practicing medicine for 20 years and has just encountered a result that does not respect their experience. She ran the sequence twice. She added 3 additional tests that were not in the standard protocol and were clearly being improvised in real time, which Soren found simultaneously alarming and professionally admirable. At the end of it, she told him he was, by every available measure, completely neurologically normal. "That's good," he said. "It is confusing," she said, which was honest and therefore more reassuring than confidence would have been. The consultation room they moved him to was on the station's diplomatic level, better furnished than the medical bay, less comfortable in a different way, with the quality of a space designed to make people feel that what was occurring in it was important and being managed. 6 officials visited him over the following 2 hours. He answered their questions each time with variations of the same honest account. He had been sitting in his corner, the Queen had sat beside him, nothing bad had happened, he had experienced a warmth, he had said hello. The warmth was the detail that generated the most questions and the least satisfying answers, because Soren did not have a more precise vocabulary for it, and was not going to pretend otherwise. The Ithari scientific advisor who visited him in the 3rd hour was different from the officials. She arrived with a data tablet and the focused energy of someone for whom this situation was primarily interesting, which Soren found more comfortable than the officials' focused energy of someone for whom this situation was primarily concerning. She explained the harmonic framework in the careful language of someone translating between scientific systems that do not share a common vocabulary. Ithari psychic projection, she said, operated on individual frequencies, unique biological signatures, as distinct as fingerprints, as consistent as bone structure. The Queen's frequency was the most powerful in Ithari recorded history, which was simultaneously the source of her authority, and the reason that direct communication with non-Ithari was, for virtually every nervous system that was not Ithari, destructive. The shielding protocols existed, because her projection was not something she could modulate or suppress. It was simply what she was, operating continuously, at a magnitude that overwhelmed non-resonant neurology, the way a signal overwhelms a receiver not built for its amplitude. A nervous system that resonated with the frequency did not experience overwhelm. It experienced, the advisor paused, consulting her tablet, choosing carefully, harmony. The mathematical relationship between the projection and the nervous system produced reinforcement rather than interference. The signal found its receiver, and the receiver was built precisely for exactly that signal. "Why?" Soren asked. The advisor looked at him with the expression of a scientist encountering a question she finds genuinely interesting. "We don't know yet," she said. "It has not occurred before." She left, the room was quiet. Soren looked at the walls, which were the neutral material of diplomatic-level rooms, and offered nothing useful in return. The second door, not the one the officials had used, set into the wall at an angle that suggested it was a connecting passage rather than a primary entrance, opened quietly. Vasara stood in it. She was without her shielding detail, without her delegation aides, without the organized distance that the rest of Meyer 3 maintained around her as a matter of both protocol and self-preservation. She looked at him with the same focused attention she had directed at him in the corner of the reception hall, and the warmth in the room increased by a degree that his neurology registered before his conscious mind finished processing that she was there. She stepped inside. The door closed. She moved to the chair across from him and sat with the deliberate economy of someone who has calculated that they have a specific amount of time and intends to use it correctly. 10 minutes, she said, in standard that was careful and accented and clearly practiced. Before they checked this passage, Soren looked at her for a moment. You planned this. The warmth shifted in the way he was beginning to recognize as confirmation. All right, he said, and put down the water glass he had been given at some point and not consumed. 10 minutes. Language between them was assembled rather than spoken. She had standard, functional, precise, selected. And he had language and the growing ability to read the warmth the way you learn to read weather, by attending to its patterns and their meanings. She projected, and he understood, not perfectly, not completely, but in the way that comprehension precedes articulation, the shape of the meaning arriving before the words for it. She told him that the harmonic compatibility was documented in Ithari records, not as a possibility that had been anticipated, but as a theoretical footnote in biological literature so old that most of her court's scientific staff had not been trained on it. The theory held that Ithari psychic frequencies, like all biological signatures, had evolved in relationship to something, that the architecture of their projection system implied, in its deep structure, a receiver it had been building toward over evolutionary time. The theory had been considered abstract. It had been considered the kind of long-range biological speculation that civilizations maintain in their archives without expecting it to become relevant. And now it is relevant, Soren said. The warmth confirmed this with a quality that he was learning to distinguish as the Ithari equivalent of dry understatement. Your counsel, he said. They don't want this. She was quiet for a moment, not the warmth quiet of consideration, but a different stillness that he read, with the new instincts that 10 minutes in proximity to her were building faster than he expected, as accurate and costly. My counsel, she said, has governed through my inaccessibility for 11 years. They are very good at it. And if you're accessible, they become intermediaries, not governors. She looked at him steadily. This is not a small difference. It was not. He understood this with the clarity of someone who has spent his career maintaining the infrastructure that powerful people rely on, and who knows exactly how much of that power lives in the infrastructure rather than the person. The translation systems he managed were not neutral tools. They were choices, selections, interpretations. Every relay he maintained was a point at which meaning could be shaped by the person controlling the relay. The Ithari Council had been the relay between Vassara and the rest of the universe. They had been the relay for 11 years. What do you want? He asked. The warmth changed, deepened, broadened, took on a quality that he did not have the vocabulary for, but that moved through his resonant neurology like a statement made without reservation. He sat with it for a moment. To speak, she said in her careful standard, directly without the passage through other hands. The door, the primary one, opened 3 minutes later, and Vassara was already standing at the secondary passage, already composed, already the contained and managed presence that her detail expected to find. She did not look at Soren as they escorted her out. He sat in the empty room with the warmth diminishing slowly and the shape of everything it had said still present in his neurology, the way a conversation stays in a room after the speakers have left, in the quality of the air, in the arrangement of the chairs, in the silence that is not absence but residue. He thought about relay systems. He thought about who controls the passage of meaning between people. He thought about the warmth and the way it had said to speak with a depth that the standard word could not fully carry and that he had understood anyway completely, without intermediary. He picked up his monitoring tablet. The translation feed was still running. The infrastructure was still operational. He was still, by every official designation, a communications analyst. He began to think about what a communications analyst, specifically, might be able to do. The formal request came through the Ithari diplomatic channel at the 7th hour of the second day, and it landed on the Accord's senior diplomatic staff with the force of something that had been constructed to be difficult to refuse, and had succeeded. Vassara, Queen of the Ithari, requested a session of direct communication with the Accord's senior council. No intermediaries, no translation staff, no advisory buffer. She requested Soren Vale as her harmonic anchor. She provided the scientific framework for the harmonic compatibility as supporting documentation. She phrased the request in the formal diplomatic language that the Accord's own protocols required for intercivilizational communication, which meant that refusing it required citing a formal counterprovision. and the formal counterprovisions available all implied, in one way or another, that the Accord was unwilling to speak directly with the Ithari Queen. Director Hawes, the station's senior diplomatic officer, called Soren in at the 8th hour and looked at him across her desk with the expression of a woman who has been doing her job for 22 years and has just found a situation in which her job has been turned, elegantly, against itself. "You understand what she's done," Hawes said. "She's made the direct communication her request," Soren said, "which means refusing it is the Accord declining, not a safety protocol being applied." "Yes, and the Ithari Council can't formally oppose it without the political motivation behind the safety argument becoming visible." "Also, yes," Hawes looked at her desk, "she did this in 7 hours." "She's been inaccessible for 11 years, Soren said. "She's had time to think about it." The session was scheduled for the following morning. The preparation it required was extensive. The shielding configuration for the council chamber, the seating geometry that would keep Soren within harmonic proximity of Vasara while maintaining the council at a safe distance, the documentation protocols that would record the session in a format that the Ithari delegation and the Accord both accepted as official record. Soren spent the night managing the infrastructure with the focused attention of someone who understands that the quality of the communication depends on the quality of the systems carrying it. The session lasted 2 hours and was imperfect in the way that first communications are always imperfect, partial, effortful, generating as many new questions as it resolved. Vasara spoke through the harmonic, through her careful standard, through Soren's growing ability to translate the warmth into the framework of words. And what the council heard was not perfect and was not complete, and was the most direct thing they had received from the Ithari Queen in 11 years of careful management. The Ithari Council's fracture lines became visible in the 5th minute, when their chief advisor attempted to supplement Vasara's communication with an interpretation that she corrected, quietly, precisely, without hostility, in standard that was exact enough to make the correction unambiguous. The council member who had been managing that particular relay for 7 years sat with the expression of someone watching their infrastructure be rerouted in real time. Nothing was resolved. The geopolitical complexity between two civilizations that had been maintaining careful distance for a generation did not simplify itself in 2 hours of imperfect direct communication. The fracture lines in the Ithari Council were exposed, not healed. The Accord's senior staff had more questions at the end of the session than they had started with, which was, Soren thought, probably the most honest possible outcome. More questions meant they were engaging with actual complexity rather than managing a simplified version of it. After the session, after the delegations had filed out and the shielding array had been powered down and the official record had been logged, Soren walked back to the reception hall because his monitoring terminal was there, and he needed to run a diagnostic on the translation feed. The hall was empty. The chairs had been rearranged for the session and not yet returned to their reception positions, except for 2 near the secondary systems terminal, his corner, that had been moved at some point and placed at an angle that suggested they had been occupied by people who had turned toward each other. He looked at them for a moment. The warmth arrived before she did. He had learned to recognize it now, the ambient quality of a frequency that his neurology received as resonance rather than intrusion, as a signal finding its receiver. Vasara stood at the edge of the corner, her detail waiting at a distance that was, he noted, slightly further than protocol required, and that he suspected was a distance she had specified. She looked at him the way she had looked at him in the holding room, the 10-minute look, the look of someone using exactly the time available, except that they were not being timed right now. He was not sure what they were being, except that it was in the process of becoming something that neither of them had planned and both of them had, he thought, stopped trying to prevent. "The council will challenge the record," she said. "They will argue interpretation. Your scientific advisor already sent the harmonic documentation to the Accord's research division," Soren said, "without going through the standard delegation channel." Her ears moved, a small, deliberate angle that he had learned to read as approval. "You noticed." "It's what I do," he said. "Notice the infrastructure." She looked at the 2 chairs at their angle, and something in the warmth deepened. The quality he still did not have a full vocabulary for but had stopped trying to translate and had simply begun to receive. "The session was imperfect," she said. "Yes. It was also the first." "Yes," he said. Those are usually imperfect. She looked at him. The room held them in the quiet that follows significant events, not silence exactly, but a kind of acoustic residue, the sound of what has happened still present in the air. There are people on both sides of this who will make it difficult, she said. I know. The harmonic compatibility is documented now. That changes what is possible and what is threatened. I know that too. Soren, his name in her careful standard, had a quality that her projection, moving through him steadily, resonant and unhurried, expanded beyond what the word itself contained. Why did you not move away, in the reception hall, when you realized who was beside you? He thought about this honestly, the way he had been thinking about things honestly since a queen sat beside him in a corner and the catastrophe failed to arrive. Because nothing bad was happening, he said. And I've spent 4 years in this work making sure the infrastructure doesn't fail. When something is working, really working, in a way it wasn't designed to, you don't interrupt it to check the manual. The warmth did the thing it did when she was not going to speak the thought in standard, because standard did not have the room for it. It expanded and deepened, and found the resonant structure of his neurology and rested there with the quality of something that had traveled a long distance and arrived. Outside the reception hall, Meyer 3 continued its careful neutrality. The delegations were in their respective quarters. The official record was logged. The infrastructure was operational. 2 chairs in a secondary corner sat at the angle of people who had turned toward each other, and the space between them held the quality of everything that had been said without intermediary, imperfect and partial and direct, and in the way of things that shouldn't work but do, entirely stable. Soren's monitoring tablet registered the translation feed running clean. He did not look at it.